Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Friday, March 11th, 2022, and tonight will be this first episode in a little mini series about mountains and the paranormal. As always, you can find all episodes of the show and information on. I messed that up and I went the wrong order. So, all episodes of the show and links to social media, ways to donate, and other ways to contact me. All of that can be found at the podcast page, which is salcidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. And always looking to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions on episodes, or you have topic suggestions for episodes. And also, of course, if you have stories of experiences that you had or others have had that you know that you trust that you'd like to share, those can either be sent in to any number of those locations as text, or if you want to contact me, you can be on the show with me at some point, and we can go over those stories, those experiences, and have a conversation about them. So, let's see here. I believe that covers that. Um, like I said, this is going to be a little mini series. Today we'll be covering the western part of the U.S. Next week we'll cover the eastern part. The week after that, I've got a couple other articles that talk about just locations around the world, and then we'll go from there. I kind of already, I've been talking with others and kind of already have an idea of a couple of places we can go from there. So, but luckily, I'm not covering this topic alone tonight. Not only do I have everyone that's in chat, thank you all for being here, but also returning again is Jen, Jen H. I've been calling her on social media. Thank you for being here, Jen. Hello.
Hello, James. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just glad to be doing this and glad to have you here again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to be here too. I'm happy to talk about this. This is really interesting.
Yeah, it was. It's always interesting when I kind of start thinking of a topic for these shows and I go to look for it. Sometimes it's hard to find things on a topic other than one or two little stories from people on different podcasts or in different articles. But then other times, like with this one, I found like 7 articles in the space of a couple hours, few hours, that talked about all this, and this was mainly just in the western part of the U.S. You know, as I said, we're not even going to be covering the eastern part yet today. So that's even more articles that I'm sure are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually really surprised at how much in the Western mountain ranges, how much they were experiencing in their mountains, in the Sierra Nevada mountains, in the Cascadian mountains, in the Rockies, and even down in the Southwest, in the plateaus and the canyons. So many stories.
Yeah, I saw some articles about canyons, and I decided I'll just leave those for another time. That may be another canyon valley kind of episode we may have to do at some point
Yeah,
because it just name any kind of location, and it seems like you'll find stuff if you look hard enough.
right? Yeah, there's
So
a ton.
yeah,
It's amazing.
um, so what is there an area that you are the most interested that you'd like to start with?
Um, well, let's see. I kind of started in the Northwest Pacific, like the Cascadians, and then I kind of circled down and then up through the Rockies when I was researching it. It kind of seemed to go that direction. But we can go, I don't think that there's any, better place to start than another. I think,
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah.
Okay, well,
Um,
then we can do that if you want to just kind of take us through, uh, you know, the that general idea of places, and we'll go from there.
yeah. So I saw that, I was looking at the first thing that came to mind, I think, initially was why would there be more paranormal experiences, or would there seem to be such a, you know, a level of paranormal activity around mountains to begin with? And if you're looking back and you listen to the stories from the American Indians, even the gold prospectors, and just the settlers in the West, it's just, it's full of all kinds of creatures and just legends about different types of paranormal experiences. And so there seems to be a connection between the spirits of the mountains themselves and that they have some kind of, they always seem to have a connection from the deep insides of the earth coming up to the surface of the earth. So there seems to be this kind of nether world thing going on where you're turning the earth, kind of inside out, but the things that might have been deep in the subterranean world beneath the earth's surface are somehow pulled up to the surface and we experience them. And also the way that it's reaching up into the clouds, you know, the way that mountains have always had this kind of mysticism about them and this kind of hold this awe for humanity in general. Forever, it seems, as being somehow closer to God and therefore more spiritual. And so I noticed that in the connection with, like a topic you're going to cover in the future, the connection with the weather and lightning, particularly, I thought was really interesting. And I think that somehow that charges these mountains, the deep mineral content from the center of the earth and the type of um, extreme activity that occurs in the birth of mountains from, the tectonic plates moving and the amount of energy involved seems to play a big role in why there is paranormal activity. And after looking into that, I started thinking about volcanoes and things like that, and I thought of Mount St. Helens.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem like also I noticed in several of these articles they talk about just lights or light coming up from these mountains at different points, especially going way far back, and that could be caused by a number of things, whether it's the like you mentioned um the ground or the tectonic plates, the volcanic activity, but then also there's the whole idea of lights from spiritual or energy, other kinds of energy that could possibly be coming up from these mountains as well.
There seems to be a lot of power behind it. Like the same thing with Mount Shasta too, being a volcano. Um, and not dormant, I guess it's still an active volcano. I think that's really interesting that people still choose to live very close to these mountains, in spite of the dangers. And like they're drawn there for all kinds of spiritual reasons. And they do. They have I guess they still have like a 24-hour camera running on Mount Shasta, watching for lights and anomalies.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, and Matt's out in the chat says here monks go to the top of mountains because they thought they were closer to the gods, make it easier to communicate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think
Yeah.
so.
So okay,
It's like
well, oops, I'm sorry.
oh, nope. Go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking since we mentioned Mount Shasta, we could maybe start with that. Um,
That sounds good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see
Lot.
here. If you want to go, I kind of like letting you go with these with whatever you found, and then go from there, so that I can just kind of add to it after, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. The things I found about Mount Shasta, kind of, it's interesting about these volcanoes. Mount Shasta is very prominent, in the skyline. It stands kind of alone, and people talk about it and compare it to like Mount Fuji, how it's very, it just dominates the landscape. And the experiences people have had, they, well, there's a belief that it's the top of a vortex of kind, like a vortex in a portal. And people have talked about possible races of, I suppose, different race of people who may have lived on the surface of the earth at one point in time, the Lemurians. And there's talk that's pretty prominent in the area about having encounters with these Lemurians who live underneath Mount Shasta in a giant city called Telos. And they reference to Telos as being that these almost to telepathy. There's a connection with telepathy with these Lemurians, and that people who live around that area account that they've had telepathic experiences with the beings that are apparently very spiritually enlightened beings, and that there might have been a type of war or a disagreement of some sort between the Atlanteans and the Lemurians back in the time of Pangea and Gondwala, or how do you say it, Gondwala? You know, when there was one big supercontinent,
Mm.
and that they had differences of opinions about how to manage other cultures that were also populating the supercontinent. And they went to war about it, supposedly. And they kind of almost wiped each other out, and the Lemurians went underground. It's kind of some of the myths I'd heard about. There's also accounts that there are reptilians. For example, Jim Morrison's girlfriend, um, Pamela Pamela Corson, I think, his girlfriend, told him about reptilians. She grew up in Mount Shasta, the town right at the base of actual Mount Shasta, and she told him about stories of reptilians living under the mountain and coming out at times and people encountering them. So as a local there, that's what she reported, which is really strange. And then we know that Jim Morrison went on to write music about that and poetry about it, about being, like the Lizard King and all that kind of um, that sort of storytelling. So I thought that was very interesting. And there are accounts of Saint Germain and people running workshops and every type of imaginable um, retreat, meditation, new age movement of any kind, I guess is really drawn to that area. And then there are accounts also of um, there was a creature that was seen, a flying humanoid creature that was also reported out of the area, that was also reported out of Mount St. Helens. And so there's some kind of connection there going on. The description of the creature is that it's a large winged creature, and it was seen flying out of a cave or a crevice near the top of Mount Shasta. And the Native Americans, or I should say the American Indians, believed too that there were um, beings known as the X key, and these were, which translates to the pains. And they're like these type of elementals, is what it sounds like, that have the power to shoot um, these pains or these X key into certain individuals. And supposedly it can be gifted to a shaman or a doctor. And it brings up all kinds of stories of witch doctors and um, because doctoring could only be done apparently in some of these cultures by um, these chosen few, like in their tribes, and they would go and they'd get these gifts from these beings, with in this case in that area, and they had the power to distribute those and also to take them back. And what was really interesting about these axe key, which are like these small little people almost, that have they shoot arrows that penetrate and deposit the pains or whatever type of ill fortune or discomfort that the person might feel.
Wow, that is interesting.
Excuse me, I'm getting. Yeah, it is interesting. And they reported it being literal. Like apparently the natives in that area learned how to make stone arrowheads versus bone arrowheads. Because I guess before that they were just able to make them out of bone, but these X key beings were able to make them out of stone. And they taught them that. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's another story here that I really thought was interesting about basically, let me see here. A story about that. Now that I lost it. I think it was a young man or a kid that um, was in the area that started having automatic writing or almost like telepathic communication, where he was given this. Oh, I found it. Here we go. So let me see here. The story is about what was it? Oliver. Um, so basically, this family was near the area, um, and there's this race of beings there, like you mentioned, um, that it doesn't really say the name in this article, but it mentions this encounter with this teenager named Oliver in the summer of 1883. Oliver was helping his family mark boundaries near the mountain for their mining operation, their mining camp. And while he was there, he began to shake and convulse, and it seemed like he wanted to write something. Um, and Oliver was really frightened, so he ran home. And his mother also noticed this, so she actually grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and gave it to him, and he started to write. And after a couple of minutes, um, he he stopped, and this trance-like state kind of stopped, and it was a story. And then, of course, there were more of these times that he would do this trance or enter this trance, and it was a story about. It was later called the existence of the secret Lemurian. Okay, Lemurian. There we go. Lemurian city and their history. And apparently, the book described the Lemurians being in Mount Shasta, and how they evolved. Basically, they are cousins, and they evolved but advanced as well, long before modern our species basically came to be. And they chose him basically to be a messenger for them. And so he basically, they, let me see here. I'm just looking through this article again. Okay, so apparently, Oliver saw these cigar-shaped airships. Where have we heard that before? But this was back in 1883, 1880s anyway. And
Right.
and also this book also mentions like quantum technology, and which is something that back then, according to this article here, was not even nearly as advanced as far as thoughts as it is now even. So that's really interesting that even that story itself I thought that was really weird.
Yeah, I think so too. And we hear a lot about these breakaway civilizations, and the people in that region seem to really think that there is a portal or some type of vortex where they're able to, in a chosen few on occasion, are interacting with these beings. Um, so maybe they are, you know. And there have been a lot of strange sightings. I've never been there, but I wish I wouldn't mind visiting sometime.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the one thing about looking into all these things. It makes you want to go there.
for sure.
So you mentioned vortexes. One of the other articles I found was about Mount Adams and the Mount Adams
Yeah.
vortex. So, um, and it's just talks about this. And I'm not sure how it's Yakamas. I'm guessing it's um, another tribe in the area. That had the story about the appearance of Mount Adams being the way it is. It just goes into a lot more, you know, basically these ideas of how these places are formed, and but even that area is known to be have UFO activity around the area, and
Mm.
that's native. the American Indians, Native Americans. I always forget which one is right. I'm terrible with that. Have had mythology surrounding that mountain going way far, way back to when they were there. So, um,
Yeah.
so I wonder if all these mountains have some kind of a vortex around them.
I think that the fact that they, at a certain point, because these mountain ranges in the West, they're much, they seem much more, you know, active, more vivacious almost, I guess is a way to put it, compared to the kind of lower rolling mountains of the East,
Mm,
you know.
interesting.
And so I wonder if in the activity, that there's still active volcanoes. We know that, over in Yellowstone, it's still kind of rumbling on occasion. Same thing with the Cascadians. It's very active. And it's a lot of, it's a lot of kinetic energy going on. And it makes me think, pardon me,
Okay.
that because of that kinetic energy, that it's churning out some type of power, you know? And then you think about just how high they're reaching up and the fact that they almost have their own weather systems, you know? So I don't know, with the lightning and everything else, maybe it is creating a type of magnetic vortex of some kind. It makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and if you think of the way so many mountains have, because they're up at that higher elevation, they have you can find it in pictures. They have snow on top of them. So that's
Hmm.
water that's sitting on there in a different form, but it's still there. And I'm sure every so often it does probably melt, you know, and so it's going down the mountain, at different points.
Right. Yes.
So,
Yeah. I don't know. It's just especially around the volcano situation, like with Mount St. Helens, right after the explosion, right after it went off in the 1980s, like in 1980, it was massive for one. I mean, volcanologists that were set up, I guess, like 5 miles from Mount St. Helens still didn't survive the blast.
mm,
And it was so devastating, you know. But it wasn't much longer after that. People started reporting seeing a huge, they call it bat squatch. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice. Bat squatch. And it's like a massive, it has like the head described as like the head of a bat or a wolf, and that it has canines. And it's kind of similar to Mothman, but a lot more intense. And it appeared after the eruption. And some people speculate that there was a tear in space-time because it was such a massive explosion, or that it was living up on top of Mount St. Helens, because a good 1,300 feet was dissolved from the top of that mountain into that crater. And so if it had been living up there, you know, and maybe living in a cave, or if it bust out of it, but apparently it was a massive creature. People were seeing it swooping, reported seeing sightings of it swooping in and out of the ash clouds. A
wow.
few people accounted that. And then it was seen as far away as Mount Rainier, too, where this 18-year-old kid, I think his name was David Cranfield, and he reported seeing it on his way home. He was in his truck, and apparently his vehicle just stopped in the road and, you know, just died, basically, which we've heard before in UFO accounts.
Right.
And then about 30 feet from the front of his vehicle, he saw this 9 foot um, creature upright with feet described as being like talons. And I guess it was like a 30-foot wingspan. And when it flew off, the flapping of its wings rocked his truck. And there were descriptions of the same creature seen as far as Akron, Ohio, not long after the explosion of Mount St. Helens.
Hmm.
And so, was there some kind of tear, and that's where that creature came from? Or was it living on the mountain and then was disturbed, by the explosion? I don't know. So, but it's really fascinating because we hear about Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because APOC mentions Bat Squatch like Mothman, which is an interesting, similarity there. And then how Mothman has been
Yeah.
linked to tragic events as well. So, um, and then Matt's all in the chat says Mount Hood in Oregon has a lot of Sasquatch activity. So, and that seems to be the case, and near these mountains as well. In some cases, especially where there's, I think, forest involved. You'll have
Yeah.
reports of that as well.
Yeah, there were reports of um Bigfoot bodies being found by like there were certain sightings. I don't know if you can't prove them or not, but that the US Forestry was trying to hide the fact that Bigfoot had actually died, that several Bigfoot had died during the explosion of Mount St. Helens, or that even they were transporting injured Bigfoot. So there are sightings of that. So I don't know, you know.
That is another thing that has come up in a lot of these articles is um, military presences being nearby, or even people going to these mountains, to certain points in these mountains, and having people show up and basically tell them, no, you can't be here. So that's interesting as
Yeah,
well.
it is strange. And I found along with these types of cryptids, there's the Wendigo. I mean, a ton of the Wendigo stories for the Rocky Mountains, and then down in the Southwest, like the Chuska Mountains, accounts of Skinwalker. So there's a ton of that tying into not just the natives in the mountains themselves, but then also like some of the ancient Anasazi stories or the Puebloan ancestors. So, which are also the Anasazi, but it's the word from the Navajo, I guess. But they have accounts of skinwalker activity in those cases too. But this Wendigo skinwalker thing, because they're different creatures. But I thought that was really, it's just, it's kind of, I don't know, it's really interesting to think of being in the mountains and all these. I guess nobody's ever actually seen one because supposedly you don't survive an encounter with a Wendigo. So nobody's really seen one from what I've heard. But somehow they have the description.
Yeah, yeah, and I just want to say thank you all for being here in the chat. So many people, it's amazing. Um, but yeah, it's Wendigo. That's a whole thing in itself. Canada, the northern areas. Um, and I mean, there are places I've heard, where we have, all these countries, we have our borders and everything, but I'm sure most other beings out there, most other entities, they don't care about that. You know, they're just gonna go where they want to go or where they feel like they need to go.
Yeah, they just follow that the mountain ranges, I suppose.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like in the cases of Sasquatch, I mean they just traverse those, whether it's the Cascadian or the Sierra Nevadas or the Rockies, they just kind of go where they please. I agree. The same would apply, I guess, with these Wendigos. The Skinwalkers are kind of related to the American Indian shamans or whole tribes in some cases that turn to doing like forbidden magic. and I thought, and with the case of the Wendigo, it's a type of spirit, I guess. So it's not even a creature; it's like a spirit that it's in the mountains and in the forests and is more active, I guess, in the winter. And I guess it tracks down its victim in a way and then possesses them. And then it creates a hunger in the individual and it makes them prone to cannibalism. But I guess as the cannibalism and the thirst or the hunger or whatever it is, as it increases, the spirit gets bigger, and so it never feels full, and so it keeps doing it. And some people think that this might have just been a story to account for the cannibalism, unfortunately, that occurred in some of these regions, especially in these mountainous regions where they had harsh winters and unpredictable weather.
yeah.
But I don't know. I really wonder because it's very specific.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because that's even been, it's amazing how much this kind of seeps into popular culture. This is kind of for Derek, the Night Stalker, out there. If and when he gets to hear this, that's Wendigo is actually used in the comics, in the Marvel comics for a while there. It's actually it's I think it's Wolverine has encountered it before, one of the X-Men. So just a little thing to
Yeah,
throw in there, but it's always interesting to me how mythology, and then reports of experiences, they make their way into popular culture, and then eventually people see that, and then they're like, oh wait, I had this experience here, with something similar, and it
mhm,
just keeps on going.
yeah, yeah. I know. Like well, like in the case of the Skinwalker and the Wendigo, it's hard to tell with the Anasazi, those ancient Puebloans that were living in the Four Corners region of Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. There's the coming off the Rockies, the plateaus there, and there are accounts of, and some stories, I mean theories, that the Anasazi, towards the end of their, I guess, the height of their civilization, that they were trying to escape from. There's like all this mythos about the skinwalkers in that case, and some people still believe, especially the Navajo believe, that if they go into these ruins, which are in the mountains, they build inside the sides of the cliff edges of some of these of the Cheska Mountains down in that region, and that they're afraid of the artifacts and everything because they believe that the bad part of the spirit of the Anasazi, of the individuals who own the possessions, that they leave a piece of themselves with those possessions, and if they should even look upon it somehow, they could take up on some kind of trouble from that spirit. And that it's a place that draws skinwalkers, supposedly, to those mountains, and people have reported seeing skinwalkers in the Cheska Mountains and the Chaco Canyon. I thought that was really weird. Like just very
It
interesting.
is, and it's yeah, it's and there's still reports of people seeing creatures that change shape, and in the end, one of the forms they take in the end is looks almost like a American Indian, just in different levels of clothing. Sometimes they're in regular clothes, sometimes they're like in a full headdress and everything. It's really odd how that's still out there, and and then some people see smaller versions of these things. Like I was listening to a podcast today, literally, which is really kind of funny. Earlier today, where there was a story from a listener about them. They saw basically they were outside their house and it was getting to be dark outside, but not quite dark yet. As dusk, and they saw what they thought was a garbage bag, a black garbage bag, being pushed down the road by the wind, except there was no wind. And it literally changed shape as it was moving to a black cat, and
Mm,
then changed shape again a little ways further down the road into this little figure, this like 1 foot tall, all dark figure.
wow.
And it literally, once it stopped and it saw this person that saw them, they um they jumped into the ground, like dove into the ground somehow. And it's just
That's
it
crazy.
was I've never heard something that to change shape twice like that. And first of all, you know,
And then just
camouflage. My
here
gosh,
too.
yeah. So
That's
it
cool.
was interesting.
Yeah, I've heard, as far as like these little people, there are a huge amount of accounts of that from the American Indians in the Rockies, in the Cascadians, in the Sierra Nevadas, just across the board. And especially, let's see, in Idaho, the Oahe Mountain, apparently there's like, they called them the Oahe dwarves. And apparently they were cannibalistic and people were afraid of them. And they're like these, like 18 inches tall, kind of like the same account of the little people around Mount Shasta with the axe key. But these were like a lot more kind of an ugly story, but it's out of Idaho, the mountains in Idaho, and um, the Wahi Mountain. And I thought they apparently have long tails
Mm,
that they wrap around their own bodies, and
wow.
it's just all kinds. Yeah, and it's some type of creature that's been same thing. Well, not like a creature, but maybe even some people speculate that this might have been like a race because Lewis and Clark, when they were exploring off, when they came off the Missouri River, the mouth of the Missouri River, entering into the Rocky Mountains, they began hearing accounts of these little people living in the mountains that were like ferocious hunters and like. So I wonder, who knows? Apparently, some of the mummies were found in caves, and as it usually goes, they went missing or they were um, just kind of relegated to uh, the dwarfs or deformed infants and things like that. But in the end, I mean, who's to say? Because they were even saying that the teeth on one of the mummies had been sharpened, but in the accounts from the American Indians, they were saying that their teeth were like canine
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah, that's wild. Just looking at the chat here. Um, first of all, of course, everything is cats. It's all cats' faults, according to chat here. Which,
Yeah.
that there's something to that. I have to say. But yeah, it's let's see. I'm just looking at the rest. Yeah, it is, and there's the other extreme of giants, and this idea that because there's another show that we listen to around sometimes, Trouble Minds Radio, where we were kind of talking about that last night about this idea that the mountains are actually like the bodies of giants.
Yeah.
That is just a very
Yeah,
interesting idea.
it is. Yeah. Well, if you think back that there might have been a time where there was a different level of gravity, and you may have actually had giants, and then supposedly if the gravity changed and it could no longer be supported, that these giants would fall, and it would make sense that they might, become petrified possibly. I don't know. It's not beyond, when you're talking about of this level of this type of topic, I guess anything's possible if you want to look for information to back it up or look for information that lends more to it. I'm sure it's there.
Yeah, maybe not even so much. Like I don't know about that for the cases of like volcanoes. The cases of mountains that are
Yeah.
volcanoes, but maybe some of the other ones that are not. I don't know how many are like this, but some of the other mountains that are not quite so volcanic, which sounds funny, but maybe
No,
that could be something similar like that.
could be. I don't know.
But
There's no,
mm,
there's lots of talk about caves being um, certain caves possibly being like cemeteries basically of a type. And I came across a lot of haunted caves too. Like in Colorado, there was one on Pikes Peak. And then there was I think it was called the one on Pikes Peak was called the Spanish Cave, and it was had a lot of lore about Spanish explorers and gold, and of course it was haunted. But there's a ton of that kind of stuff. And I also with the caves, I found that there was a transference from Tommy knockers, which are a type of creature that live inside caves that usually associated with miners and over in like the Appalachian Mountains. But I guess during the gold rush, that a lot of the miners that had been over working the mines in Appalachia were sought after by the owners of the mines that were prospecting gold. in the West, and they transferred a lot of these miners who were Cornish and Welsh in some instances where this story comes from. And they had a mythos, well, not really a mythos, but like a legend of the Tommy knockers or the knockers. And they would be deep in these mines. And I think people have probably heard of the Stephen King version of that. In this instance, they're almost like a type of like a brownie or an elf of sorts that kind of, but a little bit more garish than that, a little garish and more um, kind of, I would say, not evil per se, but foreboding, and usually um, portends like, bad fortune of some kind, or like a cave collapse, a mine collapse of sorts. And so I thought that was really interesting too, that those still carry on. In fact, there was a mine in Nevada that had been boarded up in the 50s, and a bunch of miners got together and petitioned that it be opened to allow that the Tommyknockers be able to, if they would need to get out and go to another mine or something to that effect, or the spirits that had been captured by previous miners, because apparently these Tommyknockers um, capture the spirits of the miners who die in collapses. I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah, and then you have cases of mountain tunnels being drilled into mountains, the sides of mountains for transportation, but then things go wrong. There's one I found. Let me see here. And okay, it's the old Cascade Tunnel in Washington. Um,
Yeah,
let me see, Wellington disaster.
With closing
Oops.
comments.
Okay, I think someone just had to mute there real quick. So, but yeah, basically where and I've heard this before in other places too, where due to various circumstances, as these tunnels are being made or maintained, that there's a mistake made or an accident happens, and unfortunately people die, and the workers end up getting killed in these places, and then that's where stories spring up, in the area, about people seeing them, either near the tunnel or in the tunnel. Of course, some of these tunnels they get blocked off later on, just for safety reasons. But then there's still stories about, these spirits being seen around these places.
yeah, yeah. I heard about a cave of the Winds in Colorado, and I guess it was open in the 1800s and the early 1900s, but then it was closed because there was an accident. People were exploring the cave, and I guess there was a collapse or some kind of terrible accident, and I guess 3 or 4 people passed away, and they shut it down from like 1907 to 1980, a long time,
Wow.
like a really long time,
That is.
and then they open it back up, and I guess people can go now, and they do, and explore it, and there's all kinds of they go through with lanterns and they tell ghost stories. It's really dark, kind of, because you people actually did die in there, and it's really I don't know. So there is a lot of this haunting with the caves in these mountains and mountain passes. Um, I thought too. You mentioned, one thing that we were talking about is underneath a lot of these caves too. There's the references to the reptilians as well. I noticed that with Mount Shasta, and then you saw it with the Superstition Mountains in an article that you'd come across. I thought that was a reoccurring theme in the West, on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's and I have that. I managed to find the article again. But it is interesting how everything, literally almost every kind of strange thing you want to have, you can find stories of these things by mountains. We just said we mentioned different kinds of cryptids and creatures already, and we've already mentioned UFOs, and we've already mentioned ghosts, and this literally, yeah. Let me see here.
I think it's something with like the
Yeah,
activity. Like you think about the plates, like the North American plate, and I think it's the I don't know now. It's like the fall. Somebody else would know, but it's the what's it called? The Fothark plate. I don't know. Somebody Google it real quick. I have no
yeah,
idea. But anyway, the two plates colliding, and you're thinking about the amount of, like I said, the kinetic energy from that kind of activity. and that these regions where the Rockies, the Cascadian, the Sierra Nevada mountains, where they are, that activity is still going on, like right now as we speak, like however many inches or millimeters at a time. And that energy, that's churning the center, literally reaching farther into the ground than reaching up into space, is how deep these this movement is. And so much, it's so powerful. And it's pushing all of whatever is down there up, you know? And you think about that with the mountains in the past and what might be inside them, what may be lurking there because it's coming from so deep in the earth. And the mountain is literally made of it, you know? And in some of these cases, some of these precipices of these mountains are very difficult to climb. In the cases of, for example, Mount St. Helens, where they report the bat squatch
Mm-hmm.
thing, the enormous, 30-foot winged canid slash Mothman being that may have been living at the top of that mountain or exploded out of it, or, due to some tear in space time due to the explosion of Mount St. Helens, had come through like a portal or something. But so yes, there's something about the secludedness and the isolation of these mountain peaks themselves. And then the caves, that there are some caves that people aren't allowed to even go into. For example, you can't go into the Spanish cave over in Colorado on Pikes Peak unless you have a permit from the Forest Department, from the Department of Forestry, to go into that cave because of the accidents, of course, because it's a very deep cave. But also, too, I mean, I guess there were skeletons that were discovered in there,
Oh.
artifacts. So at one point, the American Indians were using all these caves and had a thorough knowledge of these mountains. And I heard with the Lewis and Clark expedition that sometimes the tribes that they encountered wouldn't even go up some of these mountain passes, wouldn't go because of the spirits they believed were habitating them.
Yeah.
That today we go in and all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, and we even build on top of places where that's just I never cared for that. Just building on top of places where there used to be a burial ground. Oh, well, just put something there anyway.
Right.
Yeah, real good idea. I mean, it's so bad that it's become a stereotype in paranormal entertainment. Everything is built on a American Indian burial ground, and it's in a way, yeah, in a way, yes. I'm sure there are lots of those around, but they use it just to just because it's a easy way to say this place is bound to be have activity. So that I guess that's just me. I've always had a problem with Hollywood and the way they portray the paranormal. But I've already talked about that a lot before, so I probably don't need to go into that again. But yeah, and the bat squatch thing makes me think of another creature I've heard of before, and I haven't looked into this, but the whole Thunderbird legends, all the legends about those kinds of giant beings.
Yeah. Even pterodactyls, they talk about that too. The witnesses to the bat squatch, some people said that it may have been misidentified, that it was a thunderbird. But people who saw it up close, which I guess it was seen by at least 10 people and then 2 police officers in some of the sighting cases I'd heard, and people should explore this and look into it. But it was described as having the head of like people mention it being similar to a bat, but other people said it looked more like a canine or something, and that it had very pointy ears and tufts of hair. And they saw descriptions of the eyes were very specific, of them looking almost like triangles and half moon pupils, and that it was a very muscular and compared to the size of just enormous apparently. And the wingspan reaching 30 feet in some accounts, and seen as far as after Mount St. Helens. Reports of people even in Akron, Ohio, at a high school, that there were witnesses to this creature that hadn't been seen prior to that. So, but I guess the emphasis on the sightings around Mount St. Helens at the time, and then over on Mount Rainier too, and then also Mount Shasta in that same early time period there, going all the way up to 1994, as far if I remember it. And it seems like it is connected with the explosion at Mount St. Helens, but I don't know, But that's what people believe. And then but yeah, it's just in the idea of it tearing through, being such a violent
Hmm.
explosion, being such a powerful explosion that somehow it was able to do that. I don't know about the power of um, that's one of the most modern volcano. Well, it's the most modern volcano in North America that's erupted recently, besides the ones in Hawaii. But that type of, I guess it was the largest landslide in the history of the United
Mm.
States when Mount St. It was, you know, apparently pretty incredible,
Yeah.
devastating
Yeah.
apparently, but
Um, yeah, I can't imagine that. Apox in here, the chat here says technically we could all live on an ancient burial ground, and that's definitely, yeah. I mean, I think it's all a matter of time and how much time and all that. Um, but also Apox says, my friend and I saw a pterodactyl up close and personal. I can only say that it looked exactly like they are depicted. We were between 10 and 12 years old. Found out later that there were many sightings in that year range from Canada to Mexico. Two pretty well-known sightings in Texas. One with a yard full of kids, and one that got trapped in a guy's barn. Well, that had to be wonderful. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah.
wow,
So
that's crazy,
it
isn't it?
is, but it just seems like the more you look into this, it seems like so many people have
I
experiencing.
mean, amazing is a better word.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's amazing these accounts, and I don't know, they can't be, nobody can verify them. It's just these stories they're incredible. Like with in the case of well, there's so many, but in the case of the Anasazi, or I guess the Puebloan ancestors might be the more appropriate thing to say, but they were saying that just the fact that that the attachment with the skinwalker aspect, and there's theories that they built their housing like they did in the side of those cliffs because there was like they believe that there was like they've been linked to having some cannibalism fairly significant in all the Four Corners regions and all of these different sites um, for for these you know civilizations at the time, and they would blame it on this, not blame it, or would give either credit to the skinwalker slash, I mean, it's mixed stories too, because the reason I say they kind of go between the Wendigo and the skinwalker, and there's a big difference between the two, but different accounts mention both, that they had like a Wendigo spirit within the tribe itself because parts of the tribe had been practicing some kind of forbidden magic of some kind or something. But therefore, after that, the cannibalism that would later kind of destroy their society, they had built in the side of mountains like that, where there's only one, like the front entrance,
Right.
you know, very defensive from other cannibalizing tribes. And I just thought that that was really interesting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. So these different regions along these mountains and everything, a lot of like the Chaco Canyon region off the Chusca Mountain range, but when people go there, they need to keep this. I mean, keeping this stuff in mind, I think, is really important because of the history there. And like I said, with the Navajo, they take it very, apparently, on the res, they take it very seriously in that region and talk about how, like I said, that because there's their ancestral enemies, the Navajo and the Pueblo, the
Mm.
Anasazi. And so they still believe that if they even look at those artifacts, that there are on display, kind of, that they could be, attacked by that. They call it, it's like it's the evil spirit, I guess, of the individual themselves, because they believe that every spirit has like a dark side to it,
Right.
and that they, yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was really weird. How we just kind of, I don't know. You never know how much, bad luck would be attributed to making mistakes like this, or if it's such a thing to worry about. But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Better
Sure.
get,
No, it's
yeah.
it is interesting because you wonder. Like I always say, my biggest thing with all of this is there's just way too many stories and stories of experiences people have had, for it to all be made up or exaggerated. There's something out there, um, all over, and what it is, it's hard to say. Um, we've talked about this before here on this show and on Troubled Minds too. When I've been on there, the words are useful, but they're also, they don't always fit, or there's some of these stories. These things are like, well, was that this or was that that? Because they share qualities or they go back and forth, and so it's just really all
Mm.
these stories of all these strange things. They're just really interesting to look into.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
there's more apparently to the story about from APOC about the one that got trapped in a guy's barn. Apparently, it was a kid's schoolyard, and there were teachers present, so it wasn't even all just kids. So, that's that's really interesting. That makes me think of sightings. What was it? Australia and then New Zealand, was it? I forget. A couple of those cases where at a couple of different schools where kids saw a UFO and aliens come out of the UFO, you know, and
Yeah.
and that years later they stick by their stories. They stick by what they said happened.
I've heard of things like up in Canada where there are certain mountains and gorges and valleys that are so remote that they almost retain like a prehistoric type of um habit, like a sort of ecosystem going on, where you have instances of like enormous, like I've heard cases of blackbird and crow that are like the size of a dog, like enormous, and people would, I guess, the First Nations, like some of them who lived in that region, would keep them as pets, like they were these enormous blackbirds. And then I also have accounts too. They have accounts of the pterodactyls and the thunderbirds and things like that, but all kinds of other things too. Of course, the Sasquatch and stuff like that. But I do wonder if, way back in American history, before the Industrial Revolution and everything, if in these regions of the Rockies and the Cascadian and the Sierra Nevadas, and even down further off the plateau and into the southwest mountain ranges, but more earing up towards the north region, I would say probably. If they were, in the cases of Sasquatch or these thunderbirds, if they were living very remotely up in those mountains, and like in the case of the creature that they're calling the bat squash, which, you know, but still, the same thing with the thunderbirds. So if they were living up in those, at those high precipices and have become disturbed by, you know, encroaching civilization of sorts. But yeah, because I mean, you hear accounts of these types of creatures still existing up until recent, very recent, up in the deep reaches of Canada. So
Yeah, and there's also
maybe they are just creatures that have been.
sorry, yeah. There's also the idea of people, these, like you almost kind of mentioned earlier, these tears in space or maybe even time. People, in some cases, you have to wonder if people are seeing, some of these creatures are somehow getting to our time or seeing into their own time somehow. In some cases. Um,
Yeah, something to do with the. I always wondered about the
right.
lightning thing because on a mountain, it's basically like in the case of I think it was Mount Shasta. Maybe it was Mount Shasta. Or am I getting them mixed up now? But it's basically like a 14,000-foot lightning rod,
Mm.
and the lightning will just strike it repeatedly in that on the and then all the minerals inside of the mountain, the magnetism, the type of electromagnetic charge, the jolt going into it, into the mountain, into the rocks, and what that might do, because it doesn't lightning hits mountains more than it will hit anything else. And so I wonder if that has something to do with it too, that it's changing something about, or even creating, possibly some type of portal. I don't
Yeah.
know.
So APOC is giving us more of the story here about the pterodactyl in the barn. One of the kids was apparently a target for this thing. It swooped down and acted like it was going to pick the kid up. And then that's when the teachers took all the kids inside, and that's where apparently maybe that ended. I'm guessing, that's amazing. Matt says here in the chat they found woodpeckers with 15-foot wingspans in the swamps. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then APOC, electromagnetic charge with quartz content in mountains could attract lightning. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, just a heads up for everyone. There's gonna be an episode on weather and the paranormal. And once this whole mountain trilogy, I think it's gonna be a trilogy, is done, that, and then I'm gonna try to look into the 411 missing 411. We'll see what we can find on that. There's so much there to that, but let's see if we can find the weirder stuff and go with that at the very least. So those are kind of things that it's amazing how these topics kind of spring out of each other once you start doing these shows. It's a lot of fun looking into all this.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a puzzle. It just very, very carefully kind of leads one into the other. It's very kind of a natural flow. It's really good.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. It's I'm still learning how to research and getting better at research and all that, but it is fun to do this once a week or so. And so yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to leave it, I think, for today, maybe, if that's what that sounds okay to you. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, like I said, next week we'll be covering, and I say we as in just everyone in the show, whoever, you all help too, which is amazing in the chat, so I appreciate it. Talking about the eastern side of the U.S. I'm thinking in that case it'll be in large part about the Appalachians. In that case, and there's definitely a good amount to look into about that. So,
I think so. Looking forward to that, to hearing about it, or however
yeah,
it goes.
yeah,
Very interesting.
So so we'll go from there. So, Jen, if you want to stick around, you can, or you can take off, however you want to do it, and then we'll end the show here.
All right, this was very fun. I enjoyed talking with you about it and hearing all the different stories from everybody that's here.
Yeah, me too. Yep. Well, thank you again for being here, and I look forward to whenever you're able to come back for the show again.
Sure enough.
You too.
Well, have a great night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, that's going to take care of the show today. As I said, we're covering the Eastern U.S. next week. And next Friday. And next Monday, of course, will be more true paranormal stories from the web. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, more true ghost stories from the web. Next Thursday, another book review. And then, next Friday. Already planned out. So, thank you all for listening. And until Monday night, take care, everyone. And we'll talk to you then on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal.